So today for this tutorial what we will be working on is creating a drawing such as this, which layers several layers of information in Illustrator. So primarily we'll be working with Rhino and Illustrator and also a little bit of texture. So first what we'll do is we will go into Rhino and we will look at the composition. So for here, what we can see is there's basically a grid system which was extracted from Corbusier's Felsenstein in 3 dimensions, and it has kind of a rhythm. So it would be nice to represent that grid system. So have the drawing basically explain a little bit about where it came from, just visually. So if we draw on top view, you can kind of see this grid, but I think what we'll do is kind of do an oblique like so. So in order to start, what we'll do is you can set your side view here also. We will use the shear command, and we set 0, and then we will shear it so that about 20 degrees. That should give us a nice look. So hopefully that's the same angle that we've used in the past. What we'll do now is we'll just make 2D to get the base drawings. So we will be using these as just the baseline work. I have some layers set up, so I just move it to the layer that I want, and then we can start trimming and cleaning up this drawing a little bit. So we'll take this and we'll extend it. So just to kind of fill some of these holes. Some of these lines we don't necessarily need. You can kind of see how we lost this line, so you can go through and use extract surface. Let's see if that's the surface that we're looking for. It is. So then we go and we can make to do this separately. So sort of start guessing where this thing should land. So it looks like this looks fine. Let's just keep this. So now what we'll do is we'll group this and we'll use these curves to trim everything else. So we'll explode, trim, split it just so that so this is 15 curves out, so ungrouped, that's fine. So these are already single segments, so now it should let me go through and keep this, we'll keep this, and then we will keep that, we'll just delete the rest. And we'll also move everything to the same layer. So then that's kind of the very basic drafting workflow that you can use in Rhino. There's also other commands such as fillet that you can use to kind of close certain curves. So what fillet does is, if you have 2 curves, so fillet, it basically, and if you do it with a radius of 5, for example, then you get that kind of that kind of scenario. So what we'll do now is we will take the curvilinear surfaces from this geometry, and we'll try to project a hatch onto them. So what we will do is we will create a rectangle, we will hatch it, and then I want to go over importing hatches really quickly. So we can go under Hatch, under Document Properties, and then what you could do is you could download a set of hatches. These are usually .dat files, and it's just a text file. But let me see if I can load it really quickly. So you can go here, and then I just have it hosted on my web server, so you can open this, and then you could save the page as, and then it'll give you the file, and then you can, so when you load it, you can click no to replace, and that keeps your original couple of Rhino hatches. So now that we have it, we'll set the hatch. So just any of these ANC ones are fine. And then, so now this is the hatch. Now what we'll do is we'll make a copy of this geometry just so that we don't lose track. So now we can kind of rotate it as you want it to receive the projection. We can take this, make it a little bit bigger, then position it just over. And then what you could do is you could use extract surface because those surfaces were already exploded and they weren't part of the poly surface. So you can use extract surface to then get the surfaces that you're interested in. And then when you complete the command, it's a way of isolating those surfaces. So I already have that kind of extracted, so I want to project onto these surfaces. So what I'll do is I'll take the hatch, explode it, and then project, well then let's group it, and then project onto this. So now that we have this, and then, if you lose your selection, you can use cell last, and that'll give you your selection back. And so now I just group these really quickly. So let's start again where we left off. So now that we have, what we have is basically these curves, and now what we want to do is we want to basically integrate these curves with this drawing that we have. So since I lost track of kind of how I rotated this thing, let's see if we can get it back into position. So I'll be using the orient command, and we'll reference the copy. And then what we could do is we could rotate 3D. And so now we're back kind of where we started. So now that we're here, we can, everything was grouped together, so now we can take just this information and we're going to make 2D it. So now that we have this information, we will elect to put it on a different layer, and then same thing as before, we can kind of go through and trim some stuff. Maybe I don't. How does that work here exactly? I can't really tell. Do we need this line? To be honest, I'm not even sure what's that line coming from. In fact, we actually don't need these lines at all, so we can just trim them away. So now we can see here there's some issues. We can use the extend command. Let's actually not be so lazy and let's extend it as so. And obviously for the sake of this tutorial we will just leave that there, but this one is really bothering me, so let's do that. Let's ungroup everything and then group it so that all the underlying groups that make 2D made aren't a factor. So now we're at this stage. Next, what we'll be doing is we'll be taking a section cut of this model. So we will make a plane that just touches the bounds of this model. If this model was a little bit cleaner, then all this stuff would be flat and the drawing would be more accurate, but that's not the case. So but let's not dwell on that. So let's lock the curves so that we're only dealing with the surfaces. We'll run the intersect command. So now that we have the intersect command, so you can see here that it intersects everything with everything pretty much. So that's kind of one of the difficult aspects, but nevertheless what we'll do is we'll go into kind of a view like that and we'll just grab this information. And there's multiple ways of doing that. And then just, of course, to clean it up, we'll be using curve boolean. So now this information is completely flat. You can see here. So, and now we're ready to kind of position it back. You can use project to C-plane to get everything onto the Rhino's kind of construction plane, the drawing plane. So, the C-plane was actually vertical, so it projected everything vertically. So let's switch the C-plane so it's flat. So that projected it onto this flat plane. What we'll do is we'll get the boundary. It doesn't want to. See if it's able to sort through this. Yeah, it is. So what I wanted is to get this boundary, and we'll move these objects onto their own layer. So now let's move these objects into position. It's funny, I can't quite tell you where it's supposed to go. Let's reference the model. So this is cutting, I see. This is supposed to go here. Maybe it's not. But in any case, these points should be fairly aligned. So that's not confusing. So this is where it's supposed to go, turns out. Yeah. And then this is the part that sticks out because it's a messy model. So now I group this, and I'll group it again with this. So now we're able to select this. So now what we will do is, instead of hatching it like that, we first need to get we want to get this area, this curve boolean. So then we're able to hatch it. And we'll be using this as transparency with an Illustrator. So that's kind of the drawing that you start to get. We'll turn those guys on. So Now that we've done that, we'll get one last layer of information, which will be this. So I just selected make 2D and then curve boolean. So now we'll put this on its own layer, and we will hatch it. And as far as positioning it also can be tricky. So now we have this layer, this layer, this layer. So we have a few layers now of information, and ideally it's kind of representative of what this object is. So simultaneously we're taking effectively a section of this very first piece of the model, just this at that plane, and then we will be representing that within Illustrator. So now that we're at this stage, the last thing to do is to create a Rhino render. Of course, V-Ray is preferable, but we'll be going over V-Ray a little bit towards the end of the semester. So you can go under Document Properties, Render, and then you can set your resolution here. DPI, that only really matters for print. It's the pixels that matter. And then you could use a transparent background, which is very helpful because then you're able to isolate what you actually render. And then for sun, you can choose a sun, which it helps to be mindful kind of where you want the shadows. If you want the shadows on the bottom left, then you would do that. Bottom right is that. Of course, you can set it to true, but for these purposes, it doesn't make much sense to do that since we're working in a very abstract thing. So let's hit OK, and then the rest of it looks fine. And then you can render. Actually, let's zoom in a little bit closer. So let's just ZS and then we'll render. So now Rhino's doing the scans. And we're also able to adjust the gamma a little bit. So now what we can do is we can save this as Rhino Render 4. And I'm not sure what I saved it as, but yeah, I saved it as a PNG, and that's a very important moment, so I would definitely save yours as a PNG. PNG is a lossless format, so the compression is lossless. There's no loss of data when you save as a PNG, and also it has a transparency layer, also known as an alpha layer, and you'll see what that means very quickly. So the alpha layer is what gives it this transparency, and then you're able to effectively trim it much easier, just based on the transparency. So, and then in Photoshop you can obviously adjust your levels. So if you want your whites to be more white, if you want, but yeah, you can just play around here to get a certain value that you'd like. You can also make it black and white, truly. So, and then when you're done, you can flatten image, and it'll let you save it as a PNG again. So now what we'll do is we will take this into Illustrator. Now, when you export things into Illustrator, just a couple tips. It helps to have things at 0, so near the C-plane, because Illustrator's drawing bounds aren't infinite. So, and I'm not sure why they're not, but it's very easy to have something fall off of the drawing space. So base file 6, we'll call it. And then for scale, I'm doing it at half scale, 1 to half. So this is 11 inches, it'll come in as 6 inches, or 5.5 rather. So now what we can do is we can open the base files. Let's close all the other ones. Okay. That's not what I wanted, but so here, now that we're in here, we can basically set the center of this object. So using that so that it's centered to 5.5 by 5.5. We can go into our files, and then you can drop in your Rhino render. One thing to note is that there's an embed here. Currently it's a linked file, so whenever you update, whenever you actually write to this file with another program such as Photoshop, it'll actually update in Illustrator. But having said that, if you send this file to somebody and you don't send them the picture, then the picture won't be in there, so you can embed it so that it's part of this. Then we'll make it the same size, so I selected this. You have width at 6 inches. You set this to 6-inch width, and hopefully these things start to line up a little bit. So, okay. So it looks like they're on top of each other. I'll just put the render to the back and I'll call it render. So now that we're here, we'll be doing a couple of steps to basically get a layering effect that we like. So what we'll do now is we'll look for gradients. So then you can just pull one from here. I already have one saved. So what we'll do is we'll make it 11 by 11, and then we'll put it on its own layer. And we'll put that layer towards the back. So now what we'll do is we will use an opacity on this layer. So we'll do screen, and we'll do it at 50. So what this does is it just does a very light color and generally a white overlay. What we will also do is we will start setting our line weights. So we'll do 0.25. So we will do 0.25. And then we will change the, so I go here and I select everything under this layer. And I don't have any strokes, but we can just set the stroke colors. So and then another thing that's important is if you're printing, it's important to basically be mindful of your color settings. So under document color mode, you can be under CMYK. It just doesn't look as pretty as RGB because they're fundamentally different color systems. In CMYK, when you add all the colors together, as in when you mix paints, which is how CMYK works, you basically get the result is black. In RGB, the result is white when you mix all the colors, because that's kind of more how that's more how the light in general works, prisms, things like that. So when you're under CMYK, if you want black, when it's printed, you want to make sure that so you're mixing 100% cyans, 100% magentas, yellows at 100, and then black, which is K, is at 100. So this will actually give you a true black as opposed to not a true black. And then we will take this and then we'll set 0.18 for the line work. So we basically set the the stroke and the weight for the stroke. So then we kind of get this light magenta reading on the curvilinear geometry. So now that we're here, the last thing that we'll do is I want to grab the color that we've been using. So let me open up. Let me first save this. And don't be like me, please use proper file names for organization when you come back to this many years later. So let's copy that color, and then what we'll do is we'll set the hex value for this color. So now everything's kind of more or less in the same kind of color range. The colors aren't conflicting. So the last thing that we can do, so this is the project patch. I know what that is. So what we'll do is we'll create a clipping mask to basically remove this area and remove the lines from here. So we know that, let me take this path, and what I'll do is I'll duplicate it. And I'll put it under a new layer, and I'll call this master layer. Now what creating the clipping mask will do is it'll actually clip everything under that layer to this. So we will take all of our layers, we'll move it under, and then we'll put the clipping mask on top. So just, if you look closely, I select the path, I select the layer, and then I clip. So then it removes everything that wasn't under that surface. So now what we can do is we can turn on the render. You can go under opacity, and what we'll do is we will let's use an overlay. Actually, soft light. So what this blending mode does is it basically subtracts the shadows from the image. If we don't like that look, we could try something else. You could definitely use color burn. So then what it does is it takes the value of the shadows, which is very intense, and then it'll just make the color underneath kind of pop a little bit more. Basically maximum saturation and maximum value for that color. So, or of course you can use multiply, and then you kind of get this kind of scenario. But yeah, there's a million of these blending modes, and you can play around with them and find something that you like and something that relates to your overall work process. One last thing that we'll do is I'll show you how to clip a texture. So we bring in a texture. This part's not necessary, but since this texture is low resolution and it's otherwise not a very good texture, I think it's necessary to kind of tessellate it, and then we bring it over here. So what we'll be clipping it with is it'll be this path. So you can't really see that, but it's this rectilinear path. So what we'll do is we'll select it, we'll go to duplicate it, so then we put it under this layer. So now what the clipping mask will do is it'll just clip this group with this path. So we select the path and we select the top layer, then we clip. So now that we have this, we can bring it under, so it's here, and then we can also set a blending mode for it. So we'll do it for the whole for everything under that layer. You can do either colored burn, where you get a little bit of the texture through, or you could do colored dodge. No, that's too light. Overlay, or soft light. So soft light looks nice here. So I think that this should approximate what we've done in class, and approximate what we have in the PDF. Hopefully this supplements that, and I think we did get pretty close. One last thing that I would like to emphasize is basically, I think that it makes sense to draw in a way where the drawing relates to how you're working in general, and it is naturally part of that process. So in this drawing, what we did is we have two different sets of geometries, the curvilinear surfaces and the rectilinear ones, and we give one treatment to the curvilinear surfaces. So, and we did that with this hatch. So just so we can see it better a little bit. And then something else is we wanted to show this diagonal grid and how it overlays, and how it basically works with this composition. So we wanted to bring that out, so that's exactly what we did. We isolated this geometry, and then it was another layer in the drawing. Then just to kind of disambiguate things a little bit, we dropped in a rendering, so that the curves of these surfaces are a little bit more defined. But we also like the shadows and the relationship that creates. So I think that this drawing is definitely a little bit more successful than this fairly complicated object. But yeah, and hope that this was somewhat interesting to watch, and that you learned a lot from it. But yeah, just again, the last thing, I would strongly suggest that the process that you use to create the composition manifests in the drawing, and I think that that's when the drawing can become interesting, where it's not just exploring the spatial qualities such as a section, but relates to the overall process and kind of exhibits how you work and what your composition was about, and what your interests are, both graphically and in terms of geometry. So thank you so much for watching. Hope this was helpful.